You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and just like any other time, we have another special guest. Today, we have a true honor talking to a retired firefighter from New York, Andrew Serra. He has an amazing website, andrewserra.com. We're going to learn amazing stories about his career as a firefighter, but also about his latest book, Hell's 100 Acres. It's a historical novel about the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. So first and foremost, I know you've been up and early, so I want to say thank you for your time this morning. Andrew, how you doing, man?
Very well. Thank you for having me on, Shamaya.
I appreciate you being on. So before we jump into your book, you have some amazing, powerful stories, and even includes 9/11. So for our audience, kind of share with us your experience as a firefighter.
Well, I spent 25 years with the New York City Fire Department. I was hired in 1998. So as you said, I had about 3 years on the job when 9/11 occurred. You know, and like everybody affected by that tragedy, obviously it's working through that process and writing about my experiences is therapeutic in a lot of ways. It helped me move forward, and I think it was my way of dealing with it.
With your experience as a fire captain, how do you believe that shaped your perspective on the historical fires like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire? I
definitely think, even though they're different types of incidents, but they are both major fires, very, newsworthy events of their time, and tragedies with, a lot of families affected by it. So they have things in common like that. But I think what I found too, one thing it had in common was its effect, the lasting effects on the people involved, for the survivors, for the first responders. I spoke with the grandson of one of the firefighters who was on the scene, and he told stories of when he was a kid, his grandfather telling him about the fire. I mean, it was, in many ways, the defining event of their career and their life. It stayed with them. And same thing with the victims and the survivors. They gave interviews well into the 80s and 90s, many of the survivors of the fire. And it stayed with them. And I think that's true of something like 9/11, where it's a powerful part of making you who you are, and you bring that forward with you.
Once again, you listen to I Am Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to our special guest today, Andrew Serra. You can go to his website, andrewserra.com. And we're talking about his book, Hell's 100 Acres. It's a historical novel about the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. My next question for you is, in doing research for this book, is a lot of work that has to be put for something like this, for the major event. What emotions did you experience while trying to do research and writing such a tragic event?
There is a lot written about it. It's, unlike some of my other subject matters, I wrote about, say, the Italian Renaissance or the French Revolution, where I had to go back hundreds of years to try and sort through evidence. This is, as far as news events, it's 100 years it's a long time, but it's not that long of a time, and there's news reports and newspaper articles from the time, and survivor accounts and interviews that are available, and a wealth of material to go through. I think in some ways sorting through it and focusing was harder than finding things. I think I started, because I had just recently retired from the fire department and looking for a next writing project. I think I was drawn to writing, something that did involve the fire department in some kind of ways. And I started from there. And so coming at it from a firefighting point of view, I was, the beginning of my research of what the firefighters did. But then it grew, and really, I think the biggest surprise for me was not so much how much I found, but how affected I would be by the seamstresses and their stories and their backstories. They were very young, most of them, and most of them were recent immigrants to this country, and they had escaped such hardships and tragedies and violence in their old countries, and then came here and worked very long hours under very terrible conditions, and only to be hit with this. And whether they were killed by it or survived, it was I found it a very moving story to try and their lives are so rich and full. It's easy to get lost in the big number of 146 victims, to remember that each and every one of them has their own story.
When you think about the history of the event, what do you believe could been a little bit different if there was a stronger workplace safety laws before the fire?
Well, it could have all been avoided fairly easily, and something like this, it would be hard for this exact type of fire to happen today because of the rules that are in place, many of which due to this fire. The fire chief at the time, his name was Edward Croker. He was the chief of the whole fire department in New York, and he had been pushing for a long time for sprinklers in factories, and he met tough resistance from legislators and pushed on by the business owners at the time because they didn't want to pay for it. One of the exit doors was locked to prevent. They wanted to funnel all the workers out of one particular exit because they wanted to search their handbags when they were leaving. They want to make sure they weren't stealing fabric from the factory. So one exit door was completely padlocked, and the other one had a wooden partition built in front of it so that an inspector could sit and go through and inspect the workers as they were leaving. So it made it very difficult to evacuate once the fire was discovered. And so, those are the two most obvious things that were changed afterwards. Obviously, exit doors were, it's a very big point of inspection now in factories and high occupancy areas of unblocked means of egress so that people can leave and sprinklers in factories are mandatory now. So
when you look at how you just kind of explained the workplace, they were looking out for themselves more than their employees. Would you say that greed play a role in the lack of preparedness for a tragic situation like that to happen?
I think the greed was for sure the biggest driver of the safety lapses, for sure. And then probably to a lesser extent, just industrialization and technology outpacing, the public's imagination of what could go wrong. The Industrial Revolution had been in high gear for over a century at this point, and technology moved forward, profits moved forward at a far greater pace than any kind of safety measures. It usually takes a tragedy for people to realize what could go wrong, and then maybe after the fact try and fix it. And I think some of the political changes that were going on in the country, played another important factor, because it's really right at the bridge between the 19th century and the 20th century. It's 1911. We're leaving in New York City. If you're familiar with the politics of New York City in the 19th century, really it was controlled. All politics were controlled by what was called Tammany Hall. It was a political organization, a political club, really. And they were the leaders of the de facto headquarters of the Democratic Party in New York City, and they controlled all levels of power in the city. And especially amongst poorer neighborhoods and immigrant areas, it's one of these, it's that dichotomy between it. They actually did do genuine good in these areas. There wasn't really the social safety net that we have today. So people from Tammany Hall would, come across newly arrived immigrants and help them find housing, find jobs, and take care of them, probably the only people looking out for them. And what was asked in return was a loyal vote. That's how they basically bought the loyalty of the voters, and they controlled all levels of power. And the biggest driver of this in the 19th century for this organization was patronage jobs. The civil service system in New York City was completely controlled by Tammany Hall. Police, fire, all bureaucrats and appointees all went through Tammany Hall. So now comes the turn of the century, we start to have reforms, and in New York State, there's a big push for civil service reform. So now it's controlled. There's a civil service commission in the state capitol in Albany, and there's civil service tests now for appointments, and Tammany Hall loses one of their grips on power. So now they have to find a new way to stay in power, basically. And one of the ways they look to is cozying up to the business interests of the city. So you have competing forces pulling on the Tammany Hall leaders at the time, who are the leaders of the city in a sense. You have the progressive era of countrywide heating up, where there's unions are starting to rise and things are starting to change, and you have the change of how they're their power dynamic is shifting with them having to balance between taking care of the people and the push for change and the business interests, which is keeping them in power at that time. So before the fire, maybe about a little over a year before the fire, there was actually a strike amongst the garment workers in New York City, and it was a very widespread strike, and they pushed for better conditions and safer conditions, but they made very modest gains, not all that much. And there was a limit to how much they could accomplish. And part of this was because the business owners were so powerful, and they were able to, prevent the legislature from enacting meaningful change ahead of the fire.
Once again, listen on Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to Andrew Serra. Go to his website, andrewserra.com. We're talking about his book, Hell's 100 Acres. It's a historical novel about the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. When you look at the time of that event, and if you speed up to today's society, what are some lessons that you believe history can still teach us today? Especially, like you made a point about the balance of power of supporting businesses, but also supporting the goodwill of people as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the lasting lesson, obviously, from this, that, businesses, they need to make money to employ people, and that's obviously important, but there has to be a balance, and safety can't be compromised just in the name of profit. At the very least, the bare minimum of standards must be tightly adhered to.
When you look at the opportunities that people today, we have technology to look up history and look up information, what's some of the things that you feel are important for fact checking? Because it's one thing to just talk about what happened back then and what you have opinion based on today, but it's another thing to actually have actual information to back up what you are believing.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple angles. When you're writing nonfiction and history, obviously it's a much higher standard for good reason. And but even writing historical fiction, there's certain liberties you want to take, maybe to create a more compelling or interesting story amongst the characters, but you want to get the important things right, the big things right, so you might be inventing dialogue amongst characters for a fiction book, but the conditions and you want to portray, say, the seamstresses. I wanted to get it right. I want the reader to feel how they felt working under these conditions and little details. And, for me, in this case, interviews were a big part of it, survivors, and you compare them to each other and the things that they have in common and the recollections that they have. And then compare that with photos of the time or other written accounts. And newspaper articles and things of those sorts. And like I said, there's a lot that for this particular fire, there's a lot out there.
And you having written multiple books, what has been the most rewarding moment in your writing career as an author? Because we all know if you are a writer in that point, that it's not easy to one, market yourself, and two, get people to talk about your book from the beginning. It takes a lot of work and dedication.
Yeah, and I think the most rewarding thing for me is always just a one-on-one with the reader. If someone says to me, "Hey, I read your book, and this part I really connected with this part, or saw something in this character or something," and if it's really what I was trying to say or was trying to accomplish, and it came across to the reader, I think that's by far the most rewarding part.
And while we still have you as an author, when you look at how you kind of set up your marketing, how has your marketing grown, or how have you established a solid foundation? How you put your new projects out there?
Well, I've starting with very poor digital skills and internet savviness and social media. I've gotten a little bit better at it over the years. I think that's the world we live in, especially for an author to get the word out there. They have to be on social media, online and that. So that's one of the biggest approaches for me. A book like this, luckily also, and like my nonfiction book also about 9/11, there's connecting with readers who have a built-in interest for it. So in my case, like the firefighting community, has been great, getting the word out amongst them. And there's been interest among firefighters, really all over the country. People have emailed me about, taking an interest in my book or with a reaction or a connection to it. And that's been great.
Once again, listen, I'll Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Andrew Serra. Go to his website, andrewserra.com. And we're talking about his book that you can get right now. Is Hell's 100 Acres. It's a historical novel about the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. As you understand what it takes to push yourself as an entrepreneur versus think about it and talk about it, it's a whole different world when you actually had to live it. What's some learning moments, if you will, that you experienced that has equipped you to be not just a better executor with your vision, but also just understand that we need grace in these hard places when life hits you?
Yeah, I think with every book I've put out, there's it's been a learning experience, and you figure out what works better and what works well, and put ahead of time with trial and error. You might think like, oh, if I just post about my book every day, every people will know, but that's not really true. I think it's more important to connect with potential readers and have them invested in what story you might have to tell, and then you can tell them about your book, whenever. But I think it's important to build that connection and for people to say, oh, I think maybe they might be interested in what you have to say. And I'm sure it's similar to hosting a podcast and building that audience out there, trying to find that connection. More so than any one topic you might be talking about.
And speaking of connection, you had a career connecting all the time with people with your career. How has your ability to pull from your firefighting days and use that as a way to connect with the community as well?
Yeah, it's a big adjustment, obviously, from working full time as a firefighter and the demands of that job and the schedule and all, to now making a transition to being a full time writer. I think, as I said before, maybe trying to keep my feet in both worlds, because it is such a strong community amongst firefighters, and if I can maybe tell some of the stories that there are to tell, or shine a light on it somehow. Maybe that's what one of the things I can and work towards as a writer. I think that's been helpful for me to try and bridge the gap between those two professions, because they're both a big part of me, and they always will be. So it's I don't want to let go of either.
And for those who are listening to us and watching us online, I know you might have some other things that you're working on. Is there any future projects that you're working on, or are you promoting your books for now?
Right now, I've been deep into promotion mode. This book came out maybe a little over a month ago, so it's this has been my focus. It's been between writing and editing, and then the production of the book and the book launch and all that stuff. That's been my focus right now. I think I'm always on the look for the next big idea, I guess. But when it strikes me, I'll go. Sometimes you get false starts. You get something that sounds great, and you mull it over for a half hour. It's the best idea in the world, and then you start to poke holes in it and think, yeah, no. And I think maybe I should keep looking. So I think once the dust settles a little bit on with this book, then I'll probably really dig in and start working on the next thing.
And that will make me want to ask this follow-up question. You having to have the experience to have multiple published books, have you ever faced writer's block? And for our audience, kind of explain what writer's block is and what's your advice for authors out there to overcome that?
It happens to all writers. Obviously, it could be it could be writer's block where you don't know what to write about, what kind of project to start, and I guess I don't know if anyone can help you with that. You just have to find what interests you, find that spark. Whether it's something you already know about that you want to share with people, or sometimes I find the opposite to be true. It's something you know very little about and you want to learn about. And a great way to learn about something is to write about it. The research involved and digging in and finding out about it, and then formulating, a story about it. It can be a great way to learn about something. But even on a day-to-day basis, when you know what you're writing about, you're 300-page book and you're 200 pages in, and then you hit a wall or something, you don't know where to go next. It can be frustrating sometimes. One trick I have sometimes is just sit down and write anyway. Even if you don't know what you're going to write about, just sit down and just write a stream of consciousness, couple of paragraphs, and then leave them alone and walk away and read them again the next day. And a lot of times you look at it and be like, oh, this is nonsense. I don't know what I was talking about. And you get rid of it. But sometimes you keep some of it, and it helps you just move forward. And then that little bit you keep gives you the next idea, maybe to move the story forward a little bit.
My last question for you is, for authors out there who are just in the beginning of their career, maybe they are currently working on their first book, you as a seasoned writer, what do you believe makes an author ready to make that publish? To make that decision? Because like I said, it takes a lot of commitment to work on a writing project, but it's even scarier when you try to publish it for the whole world to see.
Yeah, it is. I think, unless you're, keeping a journal for yourself to organize your own thoughts, which is a great thing to do in its own right. But most people, if they're putting a story together, it's because they want to share it, and they want that feedback from the public. One advice I would say is don't forget to find a good editor. Because everybody needs an editor. Stephen King, pick any writer they ever will say. Everybody needs an editor. It's like the old adage about a lawyer, right? If you act as your own lawyer, you have a fool for a client. And I think it's the same thing with if you think you can act as your own editor, you're kidding yourself. You have to. You need a fresh set of eyes to read through it, and because what you're trying to say, and you may think it might have come across, but a fresh set of eyes is necessary, and it could be anything. Whatever. If there's so many resources now available, so many for independent authors where you can find freelance editors online, and there's very good ones. Some of them, the top ones can be very expensive, I understand, but you can find, somewhere in your price range, or even if it's not, if you're working with the tightest of budgets, find somebody you trust and that you think can organize their thoughts and write well, and just have them read it and write notes on it. And, this part doesn't work, that part, but an editor is probably the most important thing in that first decision to share it with the world. Don't skip that part.
Once again, been listening to Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Andrew Serra. Go to his website, andrewserra.com. Go check out all his books. He's not just one book guy. He has multiple books that he published. Go check out his books. And my last thing for you is, what's the best way that someone can stay connected with you on social media, or what's the best email that they can hit you up if they ever?
Yeah, everything's on the website. You can message me through the website. All the social media links are there: Instagram, Facebook. Andrew Serra, author. Just reach out and connect. Anything, anyone wants to find me, it's all there. So that's it. They make it easy nowadays, right? With the digital world.
Yeah, you just got to maintain it. That's all. You gotta wear a guy hat, so you don't make it too easy, right? But like I always want to say to our guests today, Andrew, thank you for your time, man.
Oh, thank you.